In Lesson 3, we're continuing with form design. Here I am back working on my customer form. The next field is company name. I'll slide that up under here. Sometimes you have to take just a minute to make sure you get the boxes exactly where they have to be. There we go. I'll show you some tricks in a future lesson to automatically line this stuff up faster. But for now, I want you to just focus on getting the text boxes to look right manually. You'll appreciate the tools that I show you in the future lessons if you learn how to do this right by hand. Now, company name is all one word. That's okay. That's the name of the field. But for the label, what my user sees, I'd like that to be company space name. It's a little more user-friendly. Then I'll press Enter. Now, company names can be pretty long, so I'll click on company name. I'll move my mouse right over the border there where the little dot is, and then click and drag. That's to resize the text box. Remember, we can resize it horizontally. We can resize it vertically. That's handy for note fields. We can resize both at the same time, right there. All right, but I'll put it back the way that it was, just like that. Let's do the same thing with address. I'll click address, drag it up here, put it underneath company name, slide the label to the left just a little bit, and make it wider. Now, city, state, and postal code could probably all go on the same line. So here's what I'm going to do. Watch this. I'm going to take city. I'm going to drag it up here to the next line. And let's move the label over. And let's change the label so it says city, comma, state, comma, and I'll just put zip in there. In the United States, the postal code is abbreviated as the zip code. That's fine. If you're in a different country, obviously you'll change it accordingly. Now, state needs to go up next to it, but I got this label attached to it, so I'll delete the label. I'll click once on the label and press delete. I'll slide state right up next to city and shrink it, because I only need 2 characters in there, right? NY for New York, for example. Again, this is for the United States. Your country may be different. And then I'll take postal code and do the same thing. I'll delete the label and slide the postal code field right there and resize it. See? All nice and pretty. Let's take a peek at what that looks like. I'll switch back to form view. Looking pretty good. Let's go back to design view. Maybe to maintain consistency, I'll make first name and last name touch also like that, because I have these fields touching. Now, if you look very closely at the background of the form, you'll see this series of dots back there. That's called the grid. When you move or resize your Access objects, your text boxes and your labels, Access tries to make everything fit to the grid. So the upper left corner will always line up with a grid point. The bottom always lines up with a grid point. That's just to make your objects stay nice and neat. Well, unfortunately, when you create new objects, they don't always snap properly to the grid. They'll line up on the grid, but they might not be sized exactly right to fit on the grid. If I zoom in, you can see that. Notice how customer ID, see the little dot line underneath it? That text box doesn't perfectly fit on the grid. Company name does, though. Notice how you can't see the grid dots below it because I resized company name a few minutes ago. Those are called grid points. Now, why am I talking about the grid right now? Well, notice, let's say you want to take address and make city, state, and zip snug right up underneath address. Just like that. Notice how there's a thick line there. That's because the address box is just slightly too short to meet up with those guys. So if I come in here and grab this and then resize it, now it fits perfectly together. All right? And if I take a look at it in form view, you can see how now it's perfectly right on top of each other. Now, we'll talk a lot more about the grid and how to manipulate it and change it later. But for now, I just wanted you to be aware that these little tiny dots in the background represent the grid. That's what Access tries to make sure all of your objects snap onto. All right, continuing on with our form, we've got country. I'll slide country up here. Again, notice city, state, and postal code don't perfectly fit on the grid. So wouldn't it be nice if I could resize all 3 of them at the same time? Well, watch this. Let me move country back out of the way for a second. I'm going to take my mouse over here somewhere, not touching any of the other objects. I'm going to click and drag and draw a box that just touches those three objects. You don't have to completely surround them, just touch them. Notice how I selected city, state, and postal code. I could now move all three of those objects together, or I could resize all of them together like that. See that? Or I could delete all three of them by hitting delete on the keyboard, which I won't do. But now that I just resized them, it snapped the bottom of it to the grid. See how it matches the grid dots in the background? Now I can take country and slide country up here. And then maybe resize country. See that? And of course, notice country isn't perfectly on the grid. That's one of my pet peeves about Access, is that when you create a new text box by dragging it off the field list, it doesn't necessarily snap right to the grid. All right, let's take the label, slide the label over. Don't worry if your labels snap to the grid, or even if they have like a jagged edge over here on the right, because when we go into form view, you don't see that. See, the labels, you don't see the boxes around them, whereas with text boxes, you do. All right, I'll switch back to design view again. Okay, moving on, we've got email. I'll slide email up right under there. Now, email is a hyperlink, and Access brought that in really wide, so I'll shrink that down a little bit. The next field over here is website. I'll click on that and drag it over. Drop it right there. Correct this. All right. We have phone number, number of employees, discount rate, customer cents. Let's bring over all four of these at the same time. Drop them right there. Perhaps resize all of these labels at the same time. Again, click and draw a box that just touches those four labels. Let it go. And now you'll see all four of those labels are selected. Take my mouse over one of the little dots on the edge there so I have the two-way pointing arrow, not this. Make sure you've got that. Click and drag, and that'll resize those labels. And if you want to make these bigger, you can too. Just click and drag and draw a box, and then resize. All right, you want to go all the way out to the edge? You can. That's fine. Okay, how about credit limit? Click, drag, drop it right down there. All right, a little bit too low, maybe slide it up just a bit. Resize the label. Again, this just takes practice. Just something you have to keep doing. Okay, next we have is active. Click and drag and bring that down here. Notice that comes in as a checkbox. It's a yes/no value. Access brings it in as a checkbox, so you can just check it on or check it off. I think I want to move the is active box up top, so I'll click on it and drag it up here. And I'm going to slide it right up here next to the customer ID. All right, looks good. And finally, we have a notes field. I'll click and drag and drop that down here. Notes is a memo field, so it comes in pretty big. So again, I'll scroll over and just resize that a little bit so it fits better. Perfect. And I think my notes text box is not lined up exactly with the rest of them, so I'll do that. And that will fix that. Now, if you don't want the notes field to be that big vertically, you can also change that. Now that I'm done adding all of my fields, I no longer need to see my field list. So I'll click here to close the field list. You can see now that I have a lot of room over here to the right of my text boxes where I could put more stuff. Now I could either make two columns, as the Access Form Designer did for us, or I could actually shrink up the form to make the form smaller on the screen. See that? You can click and drag this border here to make your form wider or narrower. What I like to do is use that space for notes. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete the label off of notes. Click on this and drag it over here. See that? Maybe slide it up to the top up here. And then click and drag to make it taller. Now I've got lots of room for notes. When we get into formatting in a little bit, we'll make it look colorful so it'll actually look like a little notepad. Now, just like I had extra space at the right side of the form, I also have some empty space down here at the bottom of the form. So I'll click on the very bottom down here and drag that up and get rid of some of the extra space at the bottom of the form. Now, in future lessons, we're going to be adding buttons and all kinds of other neat stuff to our forms. So we've got some room here, or I can always expand it if I need to later on. Now, some of these fields down here, like these values on the bottom here, are going to have very short values. So I could take num employees, for example, shrink it down like this, change the label so it says just employees, right? And then maybe slide this over here. See, that fits nicely there. Discount rate, probably the same thing, right? Make it smaller, because that's going to be like 14%. And slide that right there. Okay, see that? Change that so it says discount rate. Customer cents will be a date. Maybe credit limit. I can slide that over here too, right? Slide that there. Resize it. Move the label. And there we go. Now these don't quite line up with these, so maybe I'll slide these up one more little grid dot there. Perfect. And then I can bring the bottom of my form up. See? Looks good. Okay, it's time to save our form. Now I already have a customer F over here. That's the one that I use the Access Form Designer for. I'm just going to delete that. I'll click delete. Are you sure you want to permanently delete customer F? Yep. Don't need it. Now let's save Form 1. I'll press Control S on my keyboard, S as in save, or you can click on the floppy disk icon in the upper left corner, and I'll save this as my customer F. All right. I'm going to close the customer form, and now I'll reopen it again, and there's my form in Form View. For the most part, it looks pretty good. It still needs some formatting, which we'll talk about in the next lesson. There are some minor changes that I want to make, but overall, it's coming along quite nicely.